live, everybody. Great to have everyone here. I will kick things off this afternoon as everybody starts to come through and connect. We're getting a flood of people coming into today's session. I'm really excited for this one. We've had a huge response to the webinar today, so I'm really excited just to kind of get straight into this one. I won't kind of set it up too much today, but welcome everyone that is joining to Hayylo's Insights webinar number 3. The title for today's discussion is Co-Designing Personal Experience in Care Services. And so it's something that here at Hayylo we're very passionate about, but today we're very lucky to be joined with some amazing professionals in this space. So welcome, of course, Greg, who's the CEO of Hayylo, for those of you that don't know. And I'm really excited to introduce Julianne Parkinson, who's the CEO at the Global Centre for Modern Aging. So welcome both.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Simon.
No worries at all. Look, guys, this is going to be a great conversation today. So I think we get straight into it. But Julianne, what I thought would be great for everybody that's joining today is if we started off the conversation with you maybe just introducing us a little bit and giving us a bit of an overview of what the Global Centre for Modern Aging is and what you guys focus on. And Aline was telling us before that you've got some slides set up for us today to maybe run us through a bit of an overview.
Oh, that's a pleasure. Thanks so much, Simon. And hi, folks. It's just a pleasure to be with you all today and sharing this really great conversation around aging and co-design and how do we improve lives for older people and at the same time improve lives for the employees, the staff, the carers, the whole community that are part of the ecosystem. And hasn't the world changed a lot in recent years, and yet in other ways things haven't changed at all? The fact that we really want to live a bigger and better and more full life at every stage of life. And the Global Centre for Modern Aging is a not-for-profit organisation. We're headquartered here in Adelaide, South Australia. In fact, I'm inside our Life Lab, which I'll explain a little bit about a little later. It's a simulated studio. But we exist to provide research and evidence-based findings and facts to citizens, governments and businesses alike and their research partners to inform the way in which people are living differently, to inform the aspirations for which they want to achieve in the future, and how do we use an inventive process and methodology that's proven and internationally accredited to provide the innovative product development that's required in both service and product delivery in the future that enhances people's lives. So at the cornerstone of everything we do, at everything we think about and everybody we join with, it is about how does it enhance and improve the lives of older people. And in doing so, creates an intergenerational improvement, which I'm sure that everybody on this community call today is alive to, because otherwise we wouldn't be joining here so interested to understand how to navigate the next steps more fully. We are involved in some primary research, and I'm going to be sharing that. Simon asked me a little bit before we started today to give you some of the insights that have been coming from our primary research, which by the way sits on our website at www.gcma.net.au. It's freely available and it provides you with insights over the last 2 years of how Australian citizens have been waking up over the age of 18 to determine how they live and want to work throughout COVID and how they want to age in place. So those insights have been captured in the real homes and the real lives of Australians of over 12 or 1,300 at any one time, 1,200 to 1,300 every time. So quite a significant statistical data set, but also really intriguing that we focus on the particular nuances of people over 60, because that's the part of the market that we think is least understood, most to benefit from, and most in need from our perspective of our mission of requiring unique and dedicated attention. So I'll just pass on, if I may, and to Simon alluded at the beginning here about where we sit with the opportunities ahead, is we're really driven by purpose. And so at the Global Centre, you'll see we've got a Venn diagram there, and improving people's lives, as I've mentioned in our outset here of our conversation, is really that central to the point. And we also realise that to do that, to enhance the common goal of improving lives, we need to be able to interact and engage with businesses more acutely, more intimately, to allow them in to understand the genuine and very specific ways in which and the very personalised ways in which people want to age in place. And to do that, we need research partners of different sizes of capability, but all important if they share that intrinsic requirement to be part of this problem solving. And then, of course, we'd like to be involved in building the capability more broadly. And we are a sort of a not-for-profit, as I mentioned, where we're an essential conduit as well that allows research partners, governments, businesses and citizens to come together. We have our own dedicated community of co-designers, citizens of varying ages, but invariably over the age of 60, who put up their hands to be part of particular projects that they are interested in engaging with. But we also engage with corporates and international companies, as well as some smaller not-for-profits who are the businesses who want to come forward. And sometimes they have their own co-design community. Customers, for example, a bank might have, or an aged care community might have. And sometimes we use a blend of our co-designers and their customers, their clients or their consumers, who form part of the brains trust, the thinking trust, the feeling trust of what needs to happen and transpire to create the change. So what we're seeing at the moment, and I'll just get to the chase of where we are today, because things have changed from 15 years ago. And today the equation is no longer the beautiful one of between the consumer and the care provider. And when we say the consumer, we're talking about the client, the resident, their staff, the family members, and maybe honorary carers or voluntary carers that might form part of their personal community. But obviously the care provider and their staff and their management and the supply chain that sit behind them are all integral to the importance of this change. And now we have a new player in the tech provider. And along with Greg here today, we're going to be discussing what role do tech-enabled products and services play in improving the lived experience of older people and the staff and the management, everybody that sits around inside that community of change and day-to-day support. And so that's why this collaboration has changed. We need to understand the changing patterns and how we can embrace it with interpersonal confidence and include in the future and not make guesswork the mistake of the future. So what is co-design? And there are many and varied responses to this. And of course, many of you would have heard the term about being a user experience or user X or UX. And that's a broader canopy of a number of multiple different research methodologies that get brought together. And one part of that, a subset, is co-design. And as you'll see on the screen here, we look to cover that it's, creating participatory methods. We know that not one size fits all. Our engagements are usually very bespoke to the unmet need at hand, the context in which people are living, and the regulatory environment by which they might be operating within as well. And in aged care, we know all too well that's an important externality that is certainly very at the fray of day-to-day decision-making and delivery. And then what are these patterns and principles? So we're an internationally accredited living laboratory. We're accredited by the European Network of Living Labs. It's the highest order of living laboratory accreditation. We chose that as an Australian organisation that sits separate from any university. We're university agnostic or research partner agnostic, but we work alongside many collaborative research partners and our clients to be involved in some of the very complex solutions we're seeking to find and bring to market. But we do make sure that we follow strong ethics processes throughout all of our work. It's human trials in that regard, and so we take that work very seriously. And we have a dedicated suite of specialists who have been handpicked for this role in this organisation, who are gerontologists, user researchers, consumer behaviouralists, but even those scientists are focused on their second half of life. And you'll see there we talk about the movement and the guiding principle about recognising the differences that are required. So, for example, hearing perspectives or the partnering to improve, and building these new relationships and capability and capacity, which I think if we're in the aged care sector at the moment, we're all alive to the fact that things need to change, but who should we partner with and for what purpose, and how does it arrive at the impact that that our mission of our organisation is set for? So I'll just give a quick example of how things are changing and the interrelationships of some of the new partners. So right there in the centre is a person at the centre, obviously perhaps our resident, maybe living in an aged care home, but they could be living in a residential village, or perhaps they're at home, and we're seeing more and more solutions being in the at-home environment. So let's stay alive to the way in which people wish to age in place. which I think what we're seeing from our research is definitely a stronger sense of breadth of choice and quality of choice for all of the ageing in place scenarios. And then whether we're at home or we're in an aged care setting, these are the sorts of people at any age we're probably likely to brush up against in terms of our day-to-day living, and whether we've got a short-term condition or a more medium or longer term. These are some of the allied health specialists that come together to help at any one time, and we might visit them one-on-one when we're independent at home. Depending on the complexity, and inside a community of aged care living, there might be a more joined up care response. And so how do we look at this telehealth as being a fundamental change around the enhancing holistic care, with technology forming part of it? So not only the arrows going into the individual, but what's the intersection between the allied health and the data that's in the very best interest of that person at the centre of the frame. And part of that is the online services. Now, what we're seeing is that we've seen technology platforms and technology coming to the fore, and aged care providers are seeing that as well. What we're yet to develop into and evolve is a relatively new market in an existing market that's new to technology of this form, is what are some of the challenges that we're facing? And what we're seeing is that there are, there's no consistent platform, there's no consistent standards at the moment. And there's educational needs inside our staff and our management around the skills and training required to understand how to deliver new forms of tech-enabled products and services that meet the need. But I believe there's an earlier stage, and the Global Centre's been working on that too. It's about how do we as a management team and as a staff and and with our residents determine what is the unmet problem that you most need to be solving, and what are the most likely solutions, rather than being somewhat bombarded sometimes by products and services being delivered to your door in your aged care office environments, and having to make selections in quick time without enough thoughtful frameworks to support how you want to make a decision for the purposes, not just the short term, but the medium to long. So we've seen here that we need more education, that the platform providers too are coming to the party. And it's how do they access the technology? How do we design on that platform for both patient and for the practitioner? And we've been involved in some works to date, some pilots using our Life Lab and working with GPs and patients at home, practicing the telehealth in pilot trials. In fact, if you look on our website, our research has talked a lot about the telehealth emergence, the resilience of the older person, their quite wide adoption and strong adoption in a popularity sense from what it had been earlier, compared to some of the younger generations. So they are leading the charge, and we want to make sure as they do that, it's on their terms and in a way in which the allied health practitioners are respectfully regarded, and they too come on a journey that is worthwhile and meets their needs as a provider of healthcare and wellbeing to their patients and their clients. So there's some work to do here around, once we have all this understanding, how do we integrate it into clinical workflow? So the benefits of this co-design, they help us in understanding how to improve patient care, but also increase the professional satisfaction. We know that this tech-enabled solution must have aspects to it that improve workforce enjoyment and their reason for turning up and being present in the role that they signed up for that job. And how do we take some of the analog aspects and through efficiencies, through some tech, support that to be done differently, freeing them up to have more quality time with the very people they choose to be employed to play a really meaningful role. And so I'll just mention here about the co-design. It's, we can have varying levels of technology that are available, but the co-design is what makes it, co-design is what makes it key. And we need to be adopting the tech of the workforce into the workflow, and that is very much about curriculum, skills and training in a patient and considered way that reflects real life scenarios and not academic or lecture room or university or trade school settings. And so that's why it's so important that the work is carried out. And that means all of the cultural differences between us as individuals need to be taken into account, the language similarities and differences, and the many and varied things that make us unique, but as a carer and a workforce need to be considered as we pair people together to improve lives and create meaningful roles and careers for future workforces in aged care. And we were asked about co-design, and people say, well, what is it about focus groups? So I'll just show you this, what we call the petal, just to describe that focus groups are really just one aspect of a big suite of co-designed approaches or processes that we can engage in at any one time. So we've had focus groups for a long time. They haven't, since the 1960s, they haven't always necessarily shifted the dial to deliver the right level of understanding that inform product development. So there are other suites available, including now technology of, this room has 19 cameras and sensors in it, and a fully working kitchen and night vision. So we can simulate environments that are very real, and then inject that into the thinking and understanding of the observations of how people experience the care that they have in their home or in their aged care community. That's just a little shot of the team. I'm going to pass over very soon. Not everything's with high tech. We use a lot of post-it notes and a lot of good fun. The co-designers have an amazing time, and what I will bust the myth of is that, you know, that old adage that older people are risk averse, they don't like technology, and they're against change. It's simply not the case from every bit of evidence we have, as long as the process is well governed, well understood, well followed, and that the planning and the setting of the framing of what we're trying to do meets the needs of older people and the organisations and others, and we keep honest and true to those values. So on our website, you'll see a little bit more about the varying sorts of work. So I said we do primary research, we do secondary research out in desktop work around the world. Our clients are in Asia. They're in at the moment in Israel. They're in Singapore. About to start some work in Japan, and obviously work here in Australia is incredibly important. We do care about the regional and the remote, not just the high density CBD. In fact, wherever we have a say, we always look to do the trials in both settings to see the application and the opportunities. And that's where we're based. On the left is the precinct that we're located in. That's the Adelaide Hills behind us. Looks like that today, actually. It's pretty beautiful here. And on the right is the living lab, and behind those wooden doors is where I'm sitting with the fully working kitchen and the 19 cameras and sensors. So I'll just pause there, maybe take this off screen, and then back to you, Simon.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's amazing, and the centre just looks phenomenal. And you know, you touched on so many elements there, which I'm kind of really excited to dig into a few of those with both of you today. And you know, that it's quite interesting. You were talking about post-COVID, you know, the uptake of adoption of technology, and you know how that can be moved through, you know, within co-design. But what we've found, and Greg, I'll throw to you in a moment to talk a little bit about co-design at Hayylo. But what we're finding that really interesting on the ground at the moment, you know, we work with providers, you know, across all the business lines at the moment. Just how, you know, I was reading your silver lining report this morning that's on the website, and talking about, you know, some of those statistics for anyone that wanted to have a little bit of a look at those kind of things. There it is, perfect. I love how prepared you are, Julianne. But it's really quite interesting because we are hearing that same sentiment from the providers that we're working with as well. So I was having a conversation with someone yesterday, and they were saying that, you know, pre-COVID, there used to be a disconnect around how many people have a smartphone, how many of our clients connected by technology, and you know, if we are going to deploy for us a customer facing technology, will we be able to reach 100% of our communities? And from having those conversations post COVID now, that is gone. That has just been eliminated nearly. Obviously there's going to be fringe, but that's nearly been eliminated. So it's amazing to, as you're saying, get opportunities to review some of that research that you guys have out, but then be able to actually, you know, feel that as being a technology company in the sector as well, that we're actually seeing that on the front line as well and on the ground. So it's a really exciting opportunity. And one of the first things I was going to ask about is, you know, what is co-design, which I think you've given us a great overview of, and what are the difference between some of the more traditional methodologies like surveys and feedbacks and feedback and what have you, as opposed to that co-design. But when you showed that image there, it gave a really good understanding around that. But Greg, I might pause there for a second. You know, Greg, you're the technical co-founder, as we like to talk about. You know, what is co-design for us at Hayylo, and you know, how does Hayylo use it kind of day to day?
Yeah, awesome. In short, it's in the DNA of everything that we do at Hayylo. But thinking about some of the things that Julianne was saying, and you were showing us on the deck, there's so many elements there that are really key to this. And for us, when we think about co-design, it's gathering, quite simply for us, and how we've thought of it is gathering the right stakeholders together to designing something with them instead of for them. We'll always look at the old way, and it's still in existence today in a lot of places, is designing things for people. At Hayylo, since day one, is we flip that around and we design it with people, the people that are going to be using it, the key stakeholders, the consumers, the frontline support staff members, groups like Julianne who have got the research and the methodologies. All of that is really key. And I really love that Venn diagram that we were looking at, which is, shows the care provider, the consumer, and the tech partner. Like it's a super integral piece to the equation, because tech partners, most tech partners are born and bred and they think about this. It's part of their DNA. So having that thinking around as opposed to just a product is really helpful. But you know what, when we think about it at Hayylo, and thinking about, Simon, what you just said then around some of the more traditional methods, it made me think about some cool things. And I want to give 2 examples. So, and it may be a little bit risque to say this, but stay with me on this particular topic, is that, focus groups, as Julianne's saying, they've been around, and Julianne, you talk precisely about them shifting the dial and the ability for them in isolation and what they've done. But what we've found is that asking questions doesn't always lead to the truth for a number of different reasons. So I wanted to give just a couple of quick examples, because I feel that this is so integral to everyone that's designing services for elderly people and communities across the world, or for tech providers designing products. So a really cool way to think about it is, whenever people are asked questions about their future, this is when things start to change in terms of their response. And I'll give you an example. So people with hypertension that take medication, people that forget to take their medication are sometimes 3 times more likely to have a stroke, right? So, but if you ask people, do you need assistance in remembering to take your medication? Over 50%, so around 60% in this particular study, would say, no, I don't need any help. You know why? Because this is so integral and important to me. It has a direct health outcome. I won't stop taking them. 50% of people in year 1 stop taking their medication. Right. So what we think about is, when people are imagining their ideal self, people think about it. That's what they think about when they're thinking about the future, their ideal self. It's hard to think about all the things that happen day to day, like running late, forgetting something somewhere, all of those little things that are the observations that you get, which will tie nicely into the living lab conversation that we really want to have with Julianne. Another example is, and this is out of our sector, but is totally worthwhile talking about, is that there was a study done on 2 groups of people around the amount of two groups of employees around the amount of retirement savings that they had. The 2 groups had vastly different profiles. One had accumulated a lot more retirement savings than the other. When the group that had accumulated more were asked, well, why is that? The question of why. Most people said, I want to save for the future. In actual fact, that group simply didn't untick the box on their employment registration form that signed them up to the employee retirement fund. People, if you really ask people, and this is what we've found at Hayylo, if you really ask people, people wouldn't have said, I was too lazy to untick the box. People go with the defaults. So the general question that we always ask ourselves is, how do you get to the goal if the questions don't get you there? For us, it's about behavior analysis. And that is the DNA at Hayylo. It is, quite simply observing people in the environment of decision-making. There is so much that happens there. And this totally aligns to the work that Julianne and the team are doing. And there's 3 phases that we think about at Hayylo. right? Number one is to look and observe, is to look and to see how people are moving. And that's, I've just imagined all those video cameras and sensors, Julianne, that you've got in that place. And the night vision, awesome. The second is to then overlay what biases exist, right? A bias, I'll give you two examples of bias. Social norms is a bias. People are biased by what they feel is normal in society, and people will often answer in that way. Another one is loss aversion. Some people are more inclined to have a fear of a loss than a benefit of a gain. As an example, if you said, this will be healthy for you, or this is going to be unhealthy for you. People have got like a different way of thinking about things. So you need to overlay those biases. And then in reality, you just need to look at what people are doing in the real world. We saw this at Hayylo, and we saw all the barriers with technology for a lot of the people and a lot of the assumptions that exist for all of us on this call today, especially working with an older population group. And we saw that it's not necessarily the fear of technology, it's the technology itself. It's how the technology is created and what it is. And at Hayylo, one of our most powerful things is pieces of our platform which is also super intelligent, but vastly simplistic, is SMS. We have super intelligence across our SMS context in our platform, but SMS is familiar to people. SMS is already there on their phone today. It's not necessarily something net new. It's just there. And what we've tried to do as the design team is to harness that and unlock it. So coming back to it, and this is, I really was anchoring Julianne on the living lab. It's behavior, observation. I think there's so much in that, and being able to partner with groups to help unlock that and to really crack open, our thinking and open ourselves up to that is so awesome. I wanted to just ask you the question then, in terms of the living labs and some of the things that you've done, is there anything that you could share with us and the group that would inspire some thinking, maybe through some of the examples that you guys have done?
Yeah, sure, Greg. No, that's a pleasure. And, if you've not been involved in co-design before, I would say the one thing, it can take some courage. If you've been the person who's had the idea, it's sitting inside your organization, it takes some courage to say, I'm going to let somebody else, third party, review it and tell me whether it's really as good as I've always felt it is, or, others around me who are connected to me. So let's not mistake that's, it doesn't take some bravery to be able to put your idea on the table to be vetted and validated. And it does, but not to do it is such the wrong decision. Not to put yourself out there with the idea and allow it to be improved. And what I'd say is that people say, what happens in co-design? I don't know what's going to happen if I get involved in this process, either at the lab or in a real life setting, whether we're doing work in an aged care setting in Victoria or country South Australia or New South Wales or wherever. And I say, look, it's all cool because it's going to be one of three things. So I'll give you the one of three things, and I'll give you one quick example of each. One is that it's a good idea, but it needs a little bit of adaptation. And if you keep working with the co-designers that you either intend it for, or you shift the idea of who that end user is, you'll have a much better set of success. And a wonderful piece of initiative by an entrepreneur who was in a high performance athlete. It sits on our website actually, a high performance athlete with designing responses for physiotherapy in enablement rehabilitation with some tech enabled solutions in it. And it was for high performance athletes. And then he said, aha, there are far more older people on the planet than high performance athletes. And what if I was to adapt my product and test it to see how it suited? And when he went through the process through the Global Centre for Modern Aging, he learned that he didn't need to compensate and adapt the product as much as he thought he would. His views of ageism had disrupted, and he thought he'd have to compensate in all these ways, big red stop signs and big safety markers. And the older people were saying, hey, I get it, I understand. I just want to know how this rehabilitation band works on my iPhone versus my iPad versus my desktop, and how does it measure the markers of my improvement in my health that are related to this treatment. And he's just like, wow. So one thing it did is that it showed how you don't necessarily have to overly change a product. You may need to, but you don't have to go to a natural default because of your own bias. To your point, Greg, your own bias took you to that extra level of change and cost and time, only to realise that you'd missed the mark or possibly insulted, as happens, those very end users you're trying to please. Another would be a food right here in the room right now. It's set as a dining room in the area that's in front of me. And it was to look at a nutrient-rich food that was to enable better diets and nutrition for people as they age. It had been conducted in a close environment with the researcher and their industry partner, and had met with wild success because he'd been testing it with his wife at home and been receiving 100% satisfaction of how brilliant this product was. And then he ran it through a trial of, quite a few people in a dining room setting, and was to learn a far different outcome. But what it did do was tell him that this product in its current form is nowhere near levels of satisfaction. That researcher in that moment, and to his credit, pivoted, and he decided to reshape how he would design and think about that product. He started to test in real life settings in a more iterative fashion, so meeting with the real life consumers every week or every fortnight in the aged care setting or the retirement village, rather than sitting on a lab desk for 2 years creating a masterpiece. So I think those two are good examples. And then we've had others where it's been, supported that this is a very great product as it's developing as it is, and continue. And of course, when it's done with proper governance, that the pedigree of the research that underpins it, it does bring support to your investors who might be sitting behind you, who want to see the next stage of growth, but also would like to see that investment, that next level of investment go towards, market success and meeting the needs of older people. In everything we do, we focus not so much on the sale, but on the adoption of the product. Because if we don't get the right products into the market that meet the needs and then adoption, we don't change the way people live. And if we can't change the way people live, or if they can't change the way they live, we can't improve the lives. So it's not about a market-to-market sales unit conversation. That may or may not happen as a point of widespread adoption, but that's why the co-design is so important.
Yeah, I love that. And just that point that you mentioned there is, this conversation is just totally up our alley at Hayylo, right? So one of the things, and you were talking about, behavior change then, and we've seen this play out over the last many years that we've been serving our sector as well. So we've seen some of our customers change their so we work with aged care providers across the country. We've seen some of our customers change their end customers, the elderly customers in our community, change their behaviors by things that they've done that have made it better overall. Behavior change is absolutely key to this. And it's not, as you said, Julianne, it does require courage. But you know what? Thinking about the Venn diagram that you showed, you're not alone. That's the key here. The key is partnering with the right groups to help you think about this. We always say at Hayylo that it's not really about the solution to the problem. It's finding the right problem to solve. You know what? And because we know that once we've found the right problem that we want to solve, we can, as I say, assemble. We can just assemble the team, assemble teams, cross-functional teams, specialists and subject matter experts from care providers, case managers, whoever they are, a wide gamut of people. And together we can come up with this. And the frameworks that you were talking about, Julianne, are so fundamental to success. Having those methodologies is so key, and they don't have to be scary. As you said, they're fun, and they usually involve millions of post-it notes, because that's just how that works. And it is like the most tactile way to visualize and understand and to take people on a journey, because the problems that we're solving all together and the problems that a lot of the providers want to solve or uncover, they're not solved in one sitting. They're complex problems that we got to solve and iterate through. And that methodology is really, really key as well.
I think so, Greg. And I think just to add one more comment to that is that we're not necessarily the only people on the planet thinking about this. There are other people in other cities, other communities, other towns, regional and remote, that are spending time on this. And part of our broader research team is to look out far and wide around the planet to see what's happening that could be translated into an Australian setting. And likewise, as Australians, I think it's super important that we play a global role in being not just the recipient of other people's good thinking and work, but we participate to the global solutions. And so we like to think how we have that exchange of the new information that flows into projects to totally complement, as you say, the work by, you know, the groups. And for those who might be on this Zoom today saying, well, we have an unmet need, but we don't have the resources. The power of this is collaboration. There's a lot of unmet needs that are shared between aged care providers, and by coming together to agree that there's, you know, a few shared themes or a shared theme that you'd like to work on and pool some resources, your own resources, and then some external resources is all part of how we'll solve this. So, you know, no person stands alone.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It's something I kind of wanted to dig into on a tactical level, if we can. I was reading some research the other day that was saying that across the Australian aged care sector, community services sector, there's about 40% of providers that are co-designing. Now, whether that statistic is, you know, full end-to-end co-design, so to speak, or variations of it. But there's a really interesting question that came up in the Q&A from Tony, and he was just asking around, you know, aged care providers around the world, but obviously in Australia, you know, are essentially very time poor. You know, there's a lot of pressure day to day to just deliver the services and do the work. And, you know, Greg, you and I know this well around when we go to even just implement technology. I was wondering, on a kind of a tactical sense, as a provider wanting to start their journey in co-design, maybe for that 60% that aren't there, or for the 40 that are looking to expand their capabilities, where does a time poor provider start this journey? You know, and maybe Julianne, that's something you could field to start with.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And I do understand that. I think, you know, you can access the stakeholders, and there's firstly for co-design, there's quite a lot that's available online if people want to become familiar with it. But I would be mindful that living laboratories are a term that's being used a lot at the moment, labs all the time. It's not a very regulated market necessarily, and so people can call themselves, put up a shingle, and you can take somebody from your back office in marketing or accounts payable and put a badge on called facilitator and take them to a room and then call it a lab on the front door and invite your folk in and some new gadgets. But I would suggest that I would suggest too that if it's not your core business, then don't lose sight of the resources it takes to do it well, to stay abreast of the change. And that's where there are experts, and I'm not limiting that to the Global Centre by any means. I mean, go and research the sorts of experts that can be in your community. I'm very, very supportive of and interested in transferring skills to the workforce that you work with, because I think it's important that you empower people. It's part of their professional development if they find this work fun and interesting, and most find it really cool. So, like, how do we do that? But I would suggest it's and once you start in it, it's, you know, if it's not your core business, then as core business becomes more important, an influx of people or a pandemic or a flu season or whatever, that means that you have to shut down the co-design. It can be one of these things that it's a bit hot and cold. And so that's where I would suggest partnering with some other aged care providers, so that you've got, you can share out the investment that might be modest for individuals, but collectively quite reasonable, and brings you a bit of assurance until you build up the capability. But certainly online, there are many tools available. Laboratories are incredibly generous in that regard around the world. But I would say that it's a specialist domain, and particularly if you're talking about older people, and rather than co-design of people who might be, you know, testing for carbon emissions in vehicles. There's quite a different level of expertise, and so that's the other part that I'd add to the nuance of, you know, making sure they stick to the domain of ageing.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So and Greg, I'll extend to you on that in a second. So there is quite an in-depth methodology or framework around that co-design, and as you're saying, it does take some, you know, commitment and resource to start achieving that. I was going to dig in a little bit to whether there are resources out there for groups that do just want to bring co-design methodology into their day-to-day service delivery or service delivery design. Are there, you know, do you at the Global Centre have resources for providers that do want to kind of bring those things internal, or is it very much about going out into the market to find groups like yourselves to collaborate with?
Well, there's many options out there, and I would encourage anybody who's watching to explore the options that best work for them. I mean, I'm really a big fan of Taxi. the Australian Council for Social Innovation, and there'll be others working in local communities. We're looking at a sort of a somewhat like a potentially like a licensing arrangement for people where they don't have to do all of the worrying about it day to day, and we can arrange our processes and methodology, a bit like a hub and a spoke, going out to particular providers of different sizes, and we're just working on how that could look, so that it can provide them with a constant pipeline or thread to us and to the work. But there'll be other solutions out there that are standalone. You can bring researchers in-house. I'd always encourage whoever you've got in-house to be very closely involved. If you've got an innovation manager, to be obviously the central guardian of this for the community of your management.
Right, yes, and my co-design practitioners to bring in things on those lines as well. Sorry, Greg, were you going to extend on any of that there?
No, just to add to that, some of the things that, that when we look at when partnering is a really cool way to think about this. And, what we look out for, because we work with tech companies as well, we partner with technology companies to do the innovative stuff that we do, is through conversation, you'll get a good feeling. And this can happen early on. Our recommendation is look out for the signs early on in the cycle. And yes, there's probably a point at which a sale is going to occur or some kind of product. But before that, you'll get a feel for the DNA of the organization, get a feel for how they're digging in to find your problems. The key thing, I think, co-design and any kind of design is a result of having a problem and working out a way that you would like to deal with that. And the best way that we've found, and this is one of our mantras internally, is talk often and frequently. Just get in amongst the team, talk with many people as you can. It can be short conversations. Those conversations will lead somewhere. It'll either stimulate you to think about ways that maybe you would like to develop it as an organization. There is a whole discipline in this, of course. But the other way is find groups that you can partner with, and they could be technology companies, they could be consultancy groups, it could be anyone. Find groups and get a feel for how they're really digging into your problem and trying to find your problem. As we said before, we believe that solutions are everywhere, right? And you can assemble the right groups of people to find them. But as an example, as a home care provider, maybe we want to solve for service delivery cost optimization. That might be the topic. Underneath that, there'll be other things that we kind of want to solve for. Look for the groups that are talking to you, that are trying to distill that. There's a really cool sign of their level of engagement and involvement, and it also kind of sets a precedent for the process to follow. Our team at Hayylo is highly consultative in that regard, and we do that all the way from introduction through to customer advocacy, or the whole way through. As an example, and to answer that specific question, we have some groups that we work with that are aged care providers that are of a particular size, but they don't have an innovation manager. They might not have a team that can do that. So we work with them to do that. And it's really a consult where we say, what are the key problems? What are your goals for the next year? Like, what are the things that your customers want to do that your teams need? And if it's unclear at that particular stage, that's the piece of work that we do. We dig into that with them and we try and help. It may not lead to a solution with us or with parties B, C. It may require something net new, but the key is working with a group that can talk you through that. It can be a challenge. There are lots of resources out there, lots of blueprints out there around how to do this. But what we've found works well, and is consulting with your partners that you work with, talking to them and seeing how they dig in. Yeah.
That makes sense. We've got, from my experience, and ours at Hayylo, there is, sometimes an apprehension to start to, bring in the teams. There's a great comment that Sean asked in the Q&A, or just a comment. Sorry, he mentioned, just talking about the sector's somewhat institutionalized, and a lot of the co-design talk we're doing at the moment is around the clients and the families, but a lot of providers sometimes struggle to maybe approach, say, those support worker teams, and as having that provider to team kind of dynamic, being able to have those open and frank conversations around what works for you day to day and what doesn't work for you day to day. And so to have an outside consultant or team member come in to help push or ask those right questions, I think would be something that would be beneficial to providers out there, because it can be hard to even just, we know, Greg, with even just opening feedback, there is an apprehension, and sometimes an apprehension to change. So they're not easy conversations to have. So it makes sense that going out to those groups, those external groups, can be a good way to approach it initially as well. Sorry, Julianne, you're going to comment?
Oh, Simon, I was just going to say, for those who haven't got out to work out who else in the community are, I mean, certainly not inside their organisation, they can probably do pretty easily. It's finding the other aged care providers that share the same vision and level of courage that we talked about earlier, or ambition. They're not always necessarily in your similar geography. They could be there, that you share a mindset rather than share a postcode, if I can say that. So if people want to, from here, write to us and say that they've got unmet needs that they'd like to see if there are other partners. We've had 3,500 individuals sign up to be part of the Global Centre for Modern Ageing's network. And they're people who are interested in the way of doing things differently. And they're peak bodies, they're organisations. There's some new entrants into the supply chain. There's some very mature ones who are thinking of doing change themselves. So if that's at all helpful, that we can help, maybe they can write to us and we can see where the shared demand is coming from off the Zoom, and we can help guide them post this meeting. We'd be pleased to help out if that's useful.
Yeah, that'd be great. And it probably just leads in. So there's just one really interesting question from Gabrielle that came through at the end, and it made me think about, as you were saying, bringing the minds together, the collaboration together. The question was, how hard or easy in that matter, in the panelists' experience, has it been to engage people as experts from unreached communities? So LGBTI, Aboriginal Torres Strait communities, when we're looking at co-design across, as we're saying, the unreached or fringe or whatever it might be, how do you approach that, or how do we think about bringing those collective minds together? Is there any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thank you, Simon. I smiled when I saw that in the chat room, Gabrielle. So thank you for raising it, because it's absolutely essential. Every person, every individual, regardless of their preferences, is important in this journey, and we must be reaching those in the geographically hard to find, so the rural, that's not so hard, but remote, and then to all of our people, as you've identified there, Gabrielle. So I think that's really very much part of the mindset of making sure that the people you collaborate with share your vision, that it's inclusive of all, and that they make that part of the remit of the beginning. So a lot of this is about the scoping and the planning and the intention set up at the outset to make sure you've got the right partners who have a shared, and I'll use the word vested, but I mean that in its pure sense, of meeting their mission and the inclusion of all. Because nobody can be left behind in this process, nobody. And there will be lots of low and affordable solutions, cost solutions, that will come from this work. This is not just about high-end niche, well-heeled people at all. The majority are people who don't have some of those luxuries. Everyone, regardless of their economic and social circumstances, deserves the right to have an equally better life, and that's what we're out to achieve. So completely celebrate Gabrielle's question, and it has to be part of the intention of the group that meet from the outset.
Of course, I completely agree that the diversity of ideas, the more people from different backgrounds, from different, social areas in the world, will enable us to get closer to that, holistic picture of whatever it is that we're set out to design or create or build. The more minds, the better in these kind of things. So yeah, that's really great insight. Look, guys, we're kind of at time. I knew this one would fly through quickly today, but kind of any final thoughts, Greg, maybe just from yourself, and then Julianne, around, maybe just to kind of circle back again for providers out there, for people across the sector that are looking to start their co-design journey.
Yeah,
Greg?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, Simon. I think that it's cool to remember that it's a tool to solve a problem, and the fundamentals, and as Julianne mentioned in the presentation, it's a participatory approach to problem solving. And there are so many parts to this. The key to it is, we feel, is observation. Look at what people are doing, and overlay that with the core problem that you're identifying. From there, you've got a great foundation to then understand, what do I need to solve? And then that'll lead you to start asking questions around, okay, who can help me solve it? Because one of the first questions that we ask any customer that starts talking to Hayylo is, what problems are you trying to solve? And then we dig into that. That's usually the first 5 meetings that we have with customers, is just that, because we feel that, and as Julianne said, you need to have you need to have a really solid foundation in that to even approach it. And a problem that you're solving is not, I need to put technology out there in the community. That's a solution to some potentially unknown problem. Dig into the problem, find groups and partner with them, talk often to many people, many minds, as you both are saying. Diversity in ideas is key. And you'll find a group that you want to partner with. It could be technology companies, it could be advisory services, it could be other aged care providers who, I love that don't share your postcode, but share that you're in that group with them. Work with them and have conversations, and then that will lead you to open ideas in your mind and your team's mind, which will lead to amazing solutions for yourselves and the communities that you work with. Yeah,
that's great, Greg. And Julianne, there's some great comments coming through. People are saying they could listen to Julianne all day, and everyone's very much on the same page. And Georgina asked a really interesting question. I just thought I'd plant this seed quickly as you give us a kind of final wrap up. And Greg, feel free to extend on this. But when we think about the Royal Commission, when we think about all of the changes that are occurring across the sector, obviously with the May budgets coming out shortly, the kind of question from Georgina was around, what's our kind of current thinking on if and how the federal government will maybe support some of this innovation or co-design thinking. So maybe Julianne, just with that lens as well, and any final thoughts.
Oh, look, I think obviously the budget is they've already mentioned that it will be, there'll be a corpus of money dedicated to part of the response for the Royal Commission. However, I think we all know that it's not resting in the arms and the eyes of the government to solve these problems. And it will rely on the market to play a very active role in all measures to find the solutions. I would, so watch the budget with interest. What I've been hearing is, the workforce engagement, so the pay argument for our staff in aged care, the attraction and retention, the culture of organisations, the commitment to career progression and skills and workforce improvement that allow them to have more enriched lives every day is one of the key aspects. And also about how do we translate research into innovation. So how do we take the workforce and tech and bring it together? That's one of the reasons why I focused on that today. It won't be the only aspect, for sure. And I think what we want to do is don't let that feeling that it won't all rest with government burden you. There are many others in the supply chain, new and emerging, who have a vested interest in this going well. And I think we should feel, rather than the responsibility of it as being anything less than a great charge of an opportunity, to look at the supply chain and our community partners and think differently. This is no longer just because this is a human rights issue that we're talking about. The Royal Commission is a response to human rights. Now, you think about all of those in consumer brand organisations that have a responsibility to consumers and loved ones of all ages, who will come to the fore on this if we have an articulated program of and a solution that we think will solve a systemic problem in society. And that corporate social responsibility, and S being the social, is very much the ageing remit. And not just for olders, but youngers as well, but in our case, we're talking about older people. So I think that's why we should think very hard and differently about the direct and indirect people in the supply chain who have to benefit and accountability to bring uplift to humanity in Australia.
Yeah, that's fantastic. What a great way to end. There's Nicola was asking some questions and just some comments. Exactly kind of around what we were touching on before around how do we find other people that are doing this well? How do we find other groups to share and collaborate with across sectors and across the country? And she was also commenting, they were also commenting on, best practice models for co-design. So I think just to wrap up, for anyone who's joined us today, please reach out to Julianne and the team at the Global Centre. It's a really exciting time for the sector with everything that is going on, and I think through co-design and collaboration, we can achieve some great things over the coming years. So look, thank you both for joining us today. I know you're both busy, and to spend a little bit of time with us was, I hope, really beneficial and showed some value for the people that were joining us. So thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Complete
Thanks,
pleasure.
Julianne.
Thank you, Simon. Thanks, Greg. And thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Have a nice day.